And we are back. Hey, everybody, you get to see Blue Hat Zach right there. There we go. Yes.
There we go.
Right there. Hey, all right. We've got Zach Smith who's going to give you a quick little tutorial about Blender and Blender 3D. And again, if you are new to Blender, this is going to be good for you because he's going to kind of start you off on the ground up. Let me tell you a little bit about Zach real quick. He's an experimental game designer, avid game jammer, and I've met with him several times in different game jams. And he's also a Blender enthusiast from Augusta, Georgia. He started teaching Blender himself and Blender 3D modeling around 2006. So yeah, he's got some time under his belt, right? Over a decade, if you want to count the years, right? So after going to college for computer programming, his knowledge of modeling was realized and combined with his programming allowed him to start creating games. He's done several mini workshops on Blender over the years and loves to help guide new users in their struggle to master the complexity of the vast tool. Now, he has provided a link for me. I will spam that into all the different chats here very shortly. But that's enough of me talking. Zach, the show is yours. Take it away, buddy.
All right, guys. So let's go ahead and I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen real quick. Let's see. Here we go. All right, there we go. All right, am I good, Brian?
Yes, you are good. It looks good here.
All right, cool. So this is Blender. This is a little older version of Blender. This is 2.72. Current is 2.78 if you just downloaded it today. But the nice part about Blender, as far as all of this tutorial goes, what this is going to cover, we'll cover everything back to about 2.5, which was many years ago. So don't worry about what version you have. Everything's going to be compatible. So a little bit about Blender. Blender is a 3D modeling software that is available for free, open source. It was started back in the mid-90s, and after the companies that had it went folded, they were able to release it open source, and now it's still being worked on by the Blender Foundation, which is really cool that it's a software of this caliber and is actually free, which makes it great. So Brian posted a link in the chat. It's a Dropbox link to a PDF that I have. So I'll just go ahead and slide it over. If you've got an extra screen or something, I would go ahead and pull it up because it's really helpful. This is a document that I made for first-time Blender users. We're just going to walk through a little bit of the initial setup of Blender, so that way you can keep all of the little slight things that I like to tweak Blender with and make them your default settings. So for first-time Blender setup, we're going to go in and set up some input preferences. So this is our little splash screen right here. Say hi to the default cube. So in order to get to our user preferences, we're going to go into File up at the top, go down to, let's see, User Preferences. There we go. And up here under Input. So there's a couple things right here. If you're on a laptop, this is especially important. If you're not, I still like the options, so take that as you will. But the important one right here is emulating a 3-button mouse. If you don't have a 3-button mouse, or again, you're on a laptop and you don't have the middle mouse button click, this allows you to use Alt and left mouse click in order to create that same functionality, which I believe is right there, boom. As well as emulating the number pad. So normally in Blender, you'll be able to use a number pad to put in some specific views like front view, side view, and top view. This will allow you to use the numbers on your keyboard even if you don't have an actual number pad. So those are the two most important ones. I believe there's one more. Oh, not in here at the moment. And you will see that I'm using a screencast keys, which is actually built right in to Blender right out of the box. So you can just type in screencast and it's a little toggle right here. So that's what you will be seeing right here. So it'll have all of my keys up at the front. Cool. The other important thing that I find that's really helpful for people is to disable this X-ray view. If you know what it is, then you'll like it being on or off. But until you know what it is, don't worry about it. So we're going to go down here to, if you can see my mouse, to object mode and go into edit. We'll talk about this later, but go ahead and find this little button right here and make sure that is make sure this is on, so that way you can actually see through the cube. So as long as all of that's good, you can go back out to object mode. And what we're actually going to do is save as default. So save startup file. So that means whenever you load into Blender, these will be your startup settings. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and now we're good. Cool. So let's go ahead and get actually started on this. So one thing that's hard about Blender for a lot of people is the navigation aspect. And it is quirky, I'll give you that. But the important thing is knowing just how to get around. So we're gonna try to go slow and not pass over this. And I am watching chat, so if you have any questions, if I'm going too fast or miss something, go ahead and give me a shout out, so that way we can actually address any questions that you have. So for navigation, you have left and right click as far as selections go. Whenever you're moving around, and you can actually see it on my screencast, to select something, it's just a simple right click as opposed to left click. You can change this in the Blender settings. I don't recommend it because any other tutorial you're going to follow will always use this, so just kind of get used to it. A lot of Blenders just get used to it. It's not a good excuse, but that's what we got. And with left click is usually to finalize a command. So if you're wanting to move something, move it 10 units to the side, you would usually hit the either enter or left click to actually submit that. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything on my nice handy dandy little sheet here. All right, so as far as looking around goes, so we've got your orbit, pan, and zoom. So to orbit around an object, you can use your middle mouse button, and it'll orbit around wherever the center point is. And your center point can change over time, so kind of know that it's not always the center of the scene. It's the center of whatever the Blender thinks you're focused on. So you can use the middle mouse button or Alt left click if you've turned on your emulate 3-button mouse, which is usually what I use because I worked for many years on a laptop. So that's how you actually orbit around an object. So it allows you to see it from different angles. If you want to just pan, let's see, what is it? There it is. Shift middle mouse button will allow you to actually pan and move around your scene that way. So you can move, and this is really how you start to navigate in your most basic sense. So middle mouse button and shift middle mouse button allows you to pan. If you want to zoom in, scroll works great. Also, there is sort of a pinch to zoom, which is shift or control and middle mouse button, or control left click alt. So lots of shortcut keys. That's what Blender does best. So control middle mouse button allows you to zoom. Cool. Any questions so far? Everyone going well? So this is really just how you get around. It seems a long time to focus on it, but trust me, it gets really important later. As far as your number keys go, if you want to move around easily, use your mouse. But if you want to move with static views, you can use your number keys. So 1 is using a front view, 3 is your side, and 7 is vertical. With these views, it allows you to do a lot of modeling basic views, just to make sure everything looks good from the right angles. 5 is turning on and off orthographic view, which is more or less 3D version. So now everything looks 2D from this perspective. It doesn't have the 3D depth to it, which you can see when you toggle it 5 on and off. But most of your modeling will usually take place in not orthographic view, in your normal view. Anyways, all right, so let's see, what do we got next? So with as far as actually editing things goes, there's two different modes. So if you look right down here in the bottom of this panel, you have object mode and you have edit mode. Object mode is what you use for big scene changes, and edit mode is for mesh level changes. So a good way to think of it is if you're if you're building a bar stool and you're putting it in a room, if you want to move it around the room, use it in object mode and move it that way. If you wanted to make it a three-legged stool versus a four-legged stool, you would want to change the mesh, so change that in edit mode. And so you can kind of accidentally mix them up a little bit in the beginning, but don't really worry about it because you can always fix your changes. So one thing to know is that a lot of Blender shortcuts are Blender wide, and as we start getting into things, you'll start to see this. So good example. So we're going to go ahead and go into edit mode, just with our default cube here. So make sure that you have the default cube selected. You'll see the nice little border around it that's showing that this is actually the one that's selected. And go down for object mode and click it down, and you've got edit mode. You can also use tab to toggle this. That's how most people will do it. But just so you know, that's what we're actually clicking is object to edit mode. So now in edit mode, you can actually see the individual vertices. And if you were to right click these, you can select them individually. You can also use shift right click to select multiple. That's a Windows wide shortcut, not really having anything to do with Blender. But as far as Blender selections go, you have the A, B's, and C's of selections, which is easy because that's literally what they are. So for A, if you hit A, you select everything. So A is select all. A lot of the times Blender shortcut keys are much more helpful to remember when you think about the context that they're in. So A is select all. And it also works for deselect all. So if you want to make sure you've got everything unselected, just hit it a couple times. B is for box select. So you hit B and you're going to pull up this little box cursor, and you can click and drag with your left mouse button and it'll select everything within that. Again, A to select or deselect. And then C is circle select. So you can use your scroll wheel to circle this and kind of, while holding down the button, brush and highlight things as you want. One thing to know about that view is that it doesn't actually finalize until you click out. And you have to do that with the right mouse button. So cool. So that's the A, B's, and C's of selections. And again, these are Blender wide shortcuts. So if I was to go back to object mode, you can see right now we're in object mode, and I hit A, we select everything in the scene. As well, if you hit B, you can box select, and C still works for circle select. So these are Blender wide shortcut keys that we've got going here. So yeah, like Brian's saying, if you got any questions, please stop me. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going on forward. For deletions, it's going to be exactly like you think. Delete. It will pop up a little toggle. If you want to use it, I'm used to hitting X. That's how it used to be back in the day, back a long time ago, but that works just fine. So if you go ahead and delete this, we're gone. If you want to add something, you can hit Shift A. It's going to pop up this little add menu. And so we can go ahead and add a mesh cube just like we had, but it pops up way over there. Why in the world does it pop up there? That's not what we want. We want it in the middle. So if you see right here, we can't really zoom in on it because it stays the same screen size, but right here is our 3D cursor. So wherever we click, this is going to move around, and it's in 3D space. And wherever that is where we're actually going to create our next object. So if you want it centered, you can hit Shift C to center it, and it's going to center right there at 0, 0, 0. So now whenever we hit Shift A, boom, our cube is right exactly in the center, which makes things a lot easier for planning. Cool. All right, everyone good so far? No questions? All right, cool. So for the basics of modeling, for today, if we have more time, we'll work on extrusion, but for now, we're really just gonna work on manipulating default objects. So we're gonna be modeling with some of these cubes, which sounds very lackluster. Oh, do you have a question? Go ahead and ask it, Jacob Charmander. But we're actually, for today, I figured since it's about summertime, we can go ahead and model a picnic scene. Just something really simple, nothing super complicated. So got a nice handy dandy little picnic table that I saw online. And something to look at. So we're kind of going to just talk about this a little bit, plan it out so that way we can kind of see where we're going. We're not shooting in the dark as we go. So the basics are we have our flat table surface up here, which has a couple boards. So we can use different cubes for those, scale them down and put them in a line. Make sure there's a little gap between them for each board. We'll probably go with about like a 4x8 size. That's pretty standard. But don't stress about it too much. Then we have the legs, which are at a slight angle. You can go anywhere from like a 45 to, this is a little bit higher, probably about a 75-degree angle. Anyways, so we've got our legs right here with the cross beam for supporting the seats right here, which are also two beams side by side. And then to make sure the whole thing doesn't fall over, it has this cross beam, the beam right here as a support for the sides. So that's the basics that we've got right here. So this is the core of what we're just going to be modeling very simply. All right, so if you don't have a Blender cube anymore, go ahead and hit Shift A. Actually, make sure the cursor's not centered right here. Make sure that cursor's centered. So Shift C to center your cursor. Shift A to add a new cube, and it's cube is under Mesh Cube. And so now we've got our cube in the center, and we're going to go ahead and go into edit mode. Boom. All right. So a couple more Blender things to know about. If you're paying attention to the PDF that I have, we're going to be looking right about here at the moment. So the way we're manipulating objects in Blender is using basic commands for grabbing, rotating, and scaling. So when you want to move something around a scene, the shortcut key is G, which is not as like most people want to use M or any other thing. If you use Tamiya shortcuts, there's those. But G for grab is the easiest way to remember it if you have trouble remembering it. And when you want to actually, when you want it where it is, hit left click and it'll submit the change. So that way it's there. So you have grab, you have rotate. So rotate is able to rotate from whatever perspective you're in. And then scale allows you to scale objects up or down. So that's the basics of that. But the important part about all these is that commands stack, which is where it gets great and super fun. So if I wanted to scale this in the axis right here, which is X. So if you ever have trouble remembering what you're at right here in the bottom corner, it's hard to see on my screen, but you can probably see in yours, it's the widget. It helps you know which axis is what until you get used to it. But red is X. So if I wanted to scale this object in the X axis, whoops, not subdivide. If I hit S and then X right after that, it's actually going to constrain this so that way I can only scale in the X axis. So if I go into a 3D view, you can see this a little bit better. It only scales in X axis, which is great. And this command works for all the others as well. So if you've got grab and you want to grab and move it only in the X axis, it works. Move it only in the Y, Z, all of them works great. Same with rotate, just to prove a point. Rotate X. Where's Z? There we go. Okay, cool. So now it just spins on that axis, which is great. If you want to move things in a snapping function, which I highly recommend until you're really good at it, otherwise even still. So if we want to start scaling, this is going to scale. If you see in the bottom corner, below the widget, you can see scale X, Y, Z, and right now it's 3.1910 times the original size. That's not super helpful because it's really hard for me to replicate that. But if I hold Control, it snaps by tenths of a unit. So this is really helpful when you're trying to get things precise. I recommend doing it pretty much all the time. I also don't know why it's not screencasting my keys, so that's a little frustrating. But there we go, that might help. So control will snap by tenths of a unit. If you want it even finer, shift and control will snap by hundredths of a unit. So that's how you can get that fine-tuned resolution. Or if you want to do something very specific, so if I wanted to move this and the x-axis 2.1 units, I can just type it in 2.1. Actually, let me do that. Grab, oh, come on. Grab x 2.1, should snap. It's not snapping, I don't know why it's not snapping. Anyways, not the point. So, now then. So that pretty much covers most things. Your core basics as well, undo and redo. Undo is Control Z, which most people are used to that one by now. Remove something, Control Z works. If you want to redo it, it's actually Control Shift Z. I'm not exactly sure why. I think it's because it's a European-based program, but I could be wrong on that. But it's either Control Y or Control Shift Z in every single program that I've ever tried. So this one is Control Shift Z. So that's your redo function. So with that, we can actually start building the course, building our table. So let's see here. All right, so one thing about modeling is, and this has to do with whichever software you want to use, Blender or Maya or any of the others, is the difference between the mesh and the origin. So the origin is this little orange circle that you see right in the middle. The mesh has a whole bunch of data, which we can actually move apart from the origin here. It has all these different points. In a cube, it's 8 points, but Blender only sees it as 1 point, which is the origin date, the origin. So if you want something to sit exactly on the floor, you leave the origin at 0, 0, and move your mesh data to account for that. Yeah, it sure is coffee. With your origin either needs to usually be on the floor or in the center of your object. So because now if I was to rotate, and note I'm in object mode, not edit mode, if I was to rotate here, I actually rotate around the origin. So this is how your game engine is going to see it, as well as how Blender sees it at a object level, not at a mesh level. So that's something to be aware of. So now then, let's go ahead and actually start building out our nice little table. So let's see, where is our table? Did I close it? I did close it. Let me find that again. Boom. All right, table. Cool. So let's go ahead and start with the top. So we're going to do like a 5 boards wide. There's a couple different ways we could do this, but I'm going to try to vary it up a little so that way you get practice doing multiple different styles. So let's see. So I heavily use 1, 3, and 7 for front, side, and top view. I highly recommend it. Even to the point that some people in Maya and 3ds Max will actually have these preset windows, so that way you can see each one in its own corner at the same time without having to move between them. But I like the screen space and I like switching. So if you get used to that, it'll help you out a lot. So let's go ahead and take this object and make it a little flatter, because we want it to look like a piece of wood. We want it to be much, much flatter. So 2 different ways we could do it. We could either move, oh, did I turn my things off? Hang on, that's why everything's messing up. Give me just a moment. I think I actually turned it off. No, it's on. That's weird. Anyways, there we go. I don't know why that wasn't working earlier. Okay, cool. So if we want this to be nice and flat, we can either manually move these down or we can scale it. So first, let's just practice manually moving it down. So I'm going to do a B for box select and highlight the top, make sure everything is actually highlighted. If it's not highlighted, if you get something that looks like this when you highlight. Make sure you turn off this little limit to visible button. That keeps it from being X-ray view. And with X-ray view, you can actually see the points behind the current points. Gets really frustrating when that's on. So like I said, for a long time, leave that on until you know why you should turn it off. So we're going to highlight the top, and we can actually move it down using this arrow, or you can hit grab and then constrain it to the Z-axis. And if you're watching in the corner, I'm going to make this one be right above X. So it's actually going to be like at this 0.1 unit right here. So you can see it's 0.1 above the X-axis. And I'm going to do the same but for the bottom, but leave it 0.1 below. And if you're curious, Blender units are actually the same as Unity units. It's 1 meter is a unit. That's what you see here are meters. So this is a meter squared. You can treat them like feet until you have to start doing math. As far as modeling goes, you don't really have to worry about it too much. But know that a default Blender cube, if for Unity people, a default Blender cube and a default Unity cube are not the same size. A Unity cube is 1 meter cubed. A Blender cube is 2 meters cubed. So it's twice as large. Just take that into consideration. All right. So now we've got our slightly flattened piece of wood here, and let's make it longer. So we'll go into top view and hit number 7 to go into top view. And what do we say, 4 by 8? So let's make this 8 long, counting from the X-axis. So we've got 4 on this side, boom, 8 to deselect whenever you get done, and then 4 on this side. There we go. All right, so now we have a longer piece of wood. This is great. And just to keep this from being super obnoxiously wide, I'm gonna take this in a little bit. That looks good right about there. That's half a unit. So this is 1 full unit across. So that looks pretty good right there. So let's go ahead and duplicate it because we have multiple pieces of wood right here. It's not just one piece. You could make it, you know, one piece that's, you know, so big, but then it would look kind of funny. And if this was a real piece of wood, it'd be more like a door and it would warp and not look good. So let's make a couple different pieces. Places for the ants to come up during the summertime. So way you can copy these things is by actually using duplicate rather than copy. So Shift D to duplicate. And I'm going to put mine 1/10 of a unit apart and then just leave it selected and hit Shift D to duplicate, make sure everything looks good. And if you're curious, one reason why it's good to work in sideways static views as opposed to always working in a 3D view. If I was to duplicate this and try to put it over here, I can't actually get it exactly right. Even if I'm holding Control and trying to get it pretty close, look how far off I actually am. That's not even acceptable. So whereas if you're working in a static view, it's actually going to keep these on the same plane. So whichever plane that you don't see, so in this case, we have the X and the Y. I don't see the Z plane, so the Z plane is actually, everything's going to stay on that same level that it already is on. Because I've seen a lot of people work from right here when they're starting off and they try to move something and they're like, all right, that looks pretty good, and then they move and it's bad. So yeah, don't work in 3D view and don't work in this view. Looks good. Make sure things look how you want them here, but for precision, work from the side or top or something. All right, so let's go ahead, and go ahead and do the same thing here. Duplicate it yet again, and yet again. All right, so that actually might be a little too wide. We can always scale this down, but that looks decent. So we've got something going here so far. All right, so what's next? Oh, this is on the ground. We can't have this on the ground. Who wants a picnic on the ground on pieces of wood? That's boring. All right, so we can select all of this. If you want to practice something new, you can hit C, and C will as you're clicking and holding down, it'll highlight all of this, and then right-click to take that cursor away and stop selecting. And you can take all of this and grab Z and move it up. I'm going to move mine about 30 feet above the ground. That's usually where tables sit is a little high. About 30 inches, 28 inches, somewhere in there. So 3 is good enough. We're just eyeballing it. That's the nice thing. Art is eyeballing it. Precision is when you start doing CAD, making things exact. If you're doing 3D printing, make sure you know exactly what you want. This is art. We can eyeball it. It's okay. Unless you're working with other people, whereupon make sure they're eyeballing it the same. All right, so let's take this. So we've got our basis for our table. Let's go ahead and add the legs next. That should be pretty simple. So from here, without going back into, we're going to make these under the same mesh. We want them to be a single unit. So if I move this here, just point of reference, you don't have to follow along here. If I move this here, it moves as one unit. But if I select this one thing here, I can move it individually. So we're going to stay here in edit mode. It's where we can move things individually as opposed to move it all as one unit. Because we want our legs to be part of the table, not a separate piece. All right, so yeah. So we're gonna go ahead and hit Shift A and add a new cube. Make sure if for some reason you've happened to have left click in the middle of all of this somewhere, your cursor's way over here and you hit Shift A and the cube is way over there, you can undo that, hit Shift C to center your cursor, and then hit Shift A yet again, and now your cube is there. Cool. All right. So now that we've got our cube again, we want to make these thin and on the side. So let's go ahead. And instead of actually moving them manually like we did last time, let's work on practice scaling things. So we can scale this. This is Blender Thermal Cannon. Blender free 3D software. You can download it from blender.org. So we can go ahead and scale this, and let's constrain it to the y-axis. That's the green one right there behind us. And I'm going to scale it down to 1/10, and I'm holding control to make sure that snaps exactly where I want it. And that's going to be the same size as my other ones, so that way it'll look good. Go ahead and move it up so that way it's on the ground. I don't want it to be, you know, beneath the ground. We don't need that. And let's go ahead and move it sideways over here. Right about there looks good. All right. So what else do we need to do to this? Let's put it on an angle and make it a little thinner. All right. So one way we're gonna select. Actually, like I said, we're practicing scaling on this one. So let's go ahead and scale it in the X. About there. That looks good. Sure, why not? We might change that in a little bit. And go ahead and grab it, and we can grab it. Whoop. Grab on the X-axis. There we go. We'll put it about here, so that looks good. Now what we want to do is actually make this match up to the bottom of our table. So make sure you're going to go ahead and box select that top. We can grab it, and I'm going to hold control, and that'll allow me to snap. And so we can kind of get whatever angle we want for our table. Some tables, you know, indoor tables are usually straight up. Some are super hard towards the middle. The one in our reference image is about here. So, but I'm gonna go about here. That looks pretty good to me. There we go. That's starting to look pretty good. All right, so we can go ahead. If you happen to deselect everything, you can go into the side view. Sometimes when you're in this front view, it can be kind of hard to, you know, make out which vertex goes to which object. Sometimes having different views helps with that. So you can see like right here, we can actually select that, and it's great. Cool. So let's take this and let's go ahead and duplicate it. But if you notice, it doesn't mirror. That wouldn't be very functional as a table. So what we can actually do is just rotate this. So if we take this and hit R to rotate, and like I said, working in 3D view like this is not good because that's horribly off. But if we're in this view, it allows us to see what's really going on here. So if we hit R and then rotate and then constrain it in the Z axis, you can see it evenly spin around. And I'm going to make sure it's 180 degrees by holding down control. And there's 180. So that's a perfect rotation. And that looks good right there. All right, so let's go ahead and check time. All right, we've got some time left. So let's go ahead and highlight both of those and hit Shift D to duplicate them both over. So now we have a table with 4 legs. That looks great. Sweet. Yeah, Thermal Cannon. Maya is definitely good. There is much. I would probably say it's more of an industry standard, but it's cool that Blender is actually getting more industry recognition. but you can't beat the fact that Blender's free. It does have a much more difficult learning curve in some regards, but if you get past that, there's a really good piece of software beneath it. It's very powerful. You just have to put the time into it a little bit to learn it, but that's kind of how everything is in life. All right, moving on. So what's next? Let's do the support right here beneath the seats and then move on to the seats. So, okay. My cursor has gone away, so I'm going to go hit Shift C. And every time you hit Shift C, it actually focuses the whole scene out to whatever's in the scene. Not what I wanted. There we go. So sometimes if you're way out, it's good, but sometimes if you're way in, you just want it to be centered. It's kind of frustrating when it zooms out, especially if you have a really big scene. Cool. So we're going to go ahead and hit Shift A again and add up a cube. All right, and again, this one's going right beneath, right on the edge, on the outside edge of the legs that we just made, so that way the seats have some support. Cool. And again, if you're having trouble moving around, middle mouse button to orbit, and shift middle mouse to pan. That's really the bread and butter of everything. It becomes muscle memory after a while. Until then, you just gotta keep trying to remember. And I think that's on my shortcut PDF that I made available for everyone. Cool. So let's go ahead and put this right over here. So let's take this, scale it down in the Y. Again, the standard that we're using right now is 0.1 for scaling a 2/10 of a unit wide. I just like that. It's simple. You can use whatever you want. And let's make this much shorter. So scale to Z. About there, that looks good. Grab it, move it up. Let's go ahead and grab this and move it over. You can definitely use the widgets. You don't always have to move everything by the shortcut keys. Grab, rotate, scale, all of those have widgets, which are these little arrow keys that you see right here. So they are all functionally here. The buttons all work. I use them much more in Unity than I use them in Blender. I just got used to using the shortcut keys in Blender. But they're there if you're struggling and you like using the widgets. All of them are right down here underneath it by the global. Cool. So this is right here. Let's go ahead and make this a little wider yet again. X. Looks about good. Oh, that's actually not centered. That is my bad. I will center this better. Where's my leg? Oh, my leg isn't centered. That's what it is. That's my fault. There we go. Oh, I have to get the one behind me too. A lot of Blender is clicking. Just click and click and click, and eventually something pretty happens on screen. Cool. So let's go ahead and give this a slight angle so that way we can have some support for that seat. So if we scale it, and we do it right about there, that would look good, right? Yeah, that actually does look good. That's not what I expected. But if you look, we actually scaled it, and it's not properly there. So if you see the difference, when we scaled it without constraining the axis, so it actually scales in all axes, not just the X. So that's more the exaggerated version, but that's what ends up happening. So if you want to make sure you scale it properly, scale more than others, you definitely have to watch the axis when you scale it, because otherwise you're going to end up with something being off and it's not what you wanted. Cool, so that looks pretty good right there. So let's take this and let's duplicate it, move it on the other side. I'm going to make sure that I grab it and it doesn't move up or down. Oh, hang on. Let's undo that. Okay. So duplicate and then grab an X. It's not letting me do that. Okay, that's why. So I was trying to do is too many commands at a time. So I'm gonna have to duplicate it, and then if I right click, now I can move it with my commands. I should. Oh, it's because I'm trying to do X. Oh, there we go. There we go. Sometimes you try to be too helpful and you forget like your instinct. So let's go ahead and make that bottom piece down there. How are we doing on time? We're doing pretty okay on time. We should be able to finish this without no problem. All right, so scale Z 0.1. Why is it? Oh, my number block's not on. That's why I was being funny earlier. There we go. Okay, now everything should be fine. I'm gonna move this over here. Let's scale the X. That's the red one. You can see when you see that line pop up, you know that you're scaling the right one. So if I saw Z, you would see that there. X is that right there. Let's scale for maybe a little bit more. That's probably gonna be good there. Let's duplicate it, see if it looks good. And it looks okay. It's a little too far in. We'll move them both out some. And maybe we'll actually move this to accommodate. Scale that into X a little bit. That looks pretty good. And then move you in, move you in. Boom. All right. So making sure we don't hit the other vertices. Let's grab that. Oh, we forgot to scale it in the y-axis. So y, I think this is times 4. Oh, scale y 4. Boom. Yay, we have chairs. So if you missed what I did, I'm going to hit scale, and then we're going to constrain it to the y-axis, and then we're going to make sure that it's 4 units long, which is what my table was. And we can compare. If I look, it matches up seamlessly right there. Cool. And we're going to duplicate that, move it over. All right, so now we more or less have a table. That looks pretty good so far. All right. The one last thing we're going to miss is the support that runs right up down in here. Now this table right here, no one's really going to knock you for it. It looks good, but it would probably fall over. So I'm just going to add in that extra support real quick because that gives you a little bit more practice. And you have to start being a little more creative with this one. So if we take this, I'm going to move it up so that way it matches right to this top seam of our table right here. Let's scale it down. So scale it in the y-axis. And we'll do, what is that, 0.3? That looks good. I'm going to shift it over a little bit. I'm holding the widget and then holding control so it snaps. And take this, move it over so it looks pretty close to that. So now what we actually have to do to get this to match up properly is actually rotate this face 90 degrees so that way it meets up with the support properly. So we're going to take that, hit R to rotate, and rotate it 90 degrees down so that way. We don't want to double it over like that on itself. Nobody likes that. It's impossible. There we go, and that'll look pretty good. Oh, it's too wide, so let's go ahead and make sure that we've got this whole thing selected. And we can take this and scale it down into X a lot. There we go. That looks much better. All right, and this still looks kind of funny, so I'm actually gonna tweak this artistically a little bit. Let's take this and scale it down vertically a little bit so that way the piece of wood looks like a normal piece of wood. There we go. That looks pretty good. You can just kind of eyeball that. It doesn't have to be exact, but I tried to make it where this right down here and this up here was a little bit more even. So we're going to take this, we're going to duplicate it, and just like the last time when we had to do this, we're going to rotate this in the Z 180 degrees. So I should actually be able to type in 180. And I did, yeah, that worked great. So it got shifted up a little bit, but that's okay. Boom. Hey, there we go. So now if we go back to object mode right down here, from edit mode to object mode, we can actually see our table, and our table looks pretty good. Hope everyone else is following along. My table looks good. Please, I'd love to see y'all's tables if you can. I don't know how we could do that. But so if you want to take this, so we have a nice fancy little table, you could take your phone and take a picture of your screen. That looks really bad. But right inside of here in Blender, we actually have a camera. So make sure you're in object mode and you can select this camera right here. So if, one of the extra views that we have, so you have front and 3 inside. What's the problem, Stormstrike? But you can actually hit 0 and go into camera view. And from here, you can move this around. Just holding up this number. Yeah, well, we don't talk about that. It's extra detail. We could add it in real quick, but we don't have time for that today.
Yeah, if your gamers are out there like looking and judging your supports for your table, then maybe. But I believe that would just be a simple adding one more board going across the bottom. If you look at your picture one more time, Zach. Yeah, there you go.
Boom.
Just like that. Yeah.
Support.
Yeah, Storm Strike is being that guy.
It's great when you're
that company.
The fun part is when you can just respond quickly and be like, oh, well, we can actually do that real quick. Once you know Blender enough, it's actually fun. You can do a lot of stuff really quick. That's the benefit of learning all the shortcut keys. A lot of people don't like them, but when you learn them and master them, you can do a lot in a very, very short amount of time. Even to the point that if we get to do this again, we might actually rebuild this table using something called modifiers. If you want to do homework and look it up on your own, modifiers are super powerful, and we could have done this in not even half the time. It's really, really cool. You can do some fun stuff with modifiers. But anyways, back to here. So if we want to take a fun little picture of this, let's go into hit 0, and now we're in camera mode. And if you hit Shift F for fly, you can actually use your standard first-person shooter controls to actually move around and move your camera to wherever you want. So I'm just going to back it up a little bit and make sure it's right where we can actually see everything. And from here, the shortcut key for render is F12, or if I can find it real quick, I don't know where the actual command is off the top of my head. Oh, there it is. Render image, F12. Boom. There it is. Oh, but that doesn't look super, super great. So we can tweak this just a little bit. One thing that's my go-to to make everything look good is if we're over here, to take your focus away from the primary view over here that we've been working with for the whole time, and go over to this panel on the right. If you look and see a little Earth, you'll be now in world's view, in the world data, and you can come down here to this selection called ambient occlusion and hit check to turn that on, and take this and make it 0.05. This is the magic number. You can tweak it from here, but this is one of those numbers that looks pretty good if you just leave it there. So now if you compared to what we just did, that looks a lot better. You can see some of that table detail. Versus if we turn that off and render it again, ambient occlusion just allows the light to bounce to the scene, around the scene more often, and looks a lot more realistic for what it is. So that's a nice little table we've got here. So we've got a little bit extra time. Does anybody have any questions? Like me to go over something?
And while you're going over, if anybody has any questions, please post them in chat. We do have a few more minutes. And thank you, Melisauce, on Twitch for subscribing. And yes, just to remind everybody that this will be uploaded on our YouTube channel for permanent. Like, you can forever go back and watch this and hit pause and wonder what the heck he just did, try to find it. So, but everybody on Twitch, YouTube, and Mixer, you can always find us on Georgia Game Devs. So be sure to hit that like, subscribe, and follow button. We really appreciate it. Go ahead, Zach.
All right, and to say something to Stormstrike real quick. He's talking about being used to Maya and the controls being very different. That's very true, and I encourage you to learn the Blender shortcuts because it's much more helpful when you go to someone else's computer and you want to use their Blender. But if you're having some struggles and you want to kind of get used to Blender and then maybe ease into the shortcuts, you can open up the user preferences like we did earlier under file user preferences, and under the presets you actually have a Maya preset. That's the nice thing about Blender being open source, is that people wanted to come from Maya to this and from 3ds Max as well, and they wanted some of their shortcut keys to be the same. So you can actually use other people's list of default Maya and 3ds Max shortcut keys, which is really helpful. Now I've never used them, so I can't say what does and doesn't work. Everything that I will say will always be Blender shortcut keys, and most people on YouTube will be like that, so take that as you will. I always suggest learning the defaults just because then you'll be that much better at the tool. Anyways, back to where we were. So if no one has any specific questions, let's add a little bit of color to this. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Um, so last time we were looking at the world settings. So if you look, there's another little circle over here. Um, and this is where your materials are. Now, materials we'll talk about next time. But for the basic part of it, it's kind of like the skin on top of your object. Materials and textures go hand in hand. Textures are the image, what you see on it, and the materials are the data that holds the texture. So if you hit new texture, you can see it change from this off-white to this nice brighter white, and we can actually take this, and I'm not going to explain this the whole lot at the moment, just because hopefully we'll get to do this again, and we'll have more time to really go into materials. And this is the old materials. This is Blender render materials, not Cycles engine materials. If you look into tutorials, know there's a distinct difference. But we can change this right here, and let's get something that's kind of a little bit more brown. There we go. That looks pretty good. So right there, we've got a nice little table. And if we go and render it again, let's turn up the ambient occlusion a little bit. So if you turn it up, it'll allow more light to bounce around the scene. There we go. And so let's see. What else can we do to make this a little bit better? So right now, if we compare the difference, we've got a fairly nice little table here. And this is up against a blank backdrop, just like ours is. But we can, trick this out a little bit more. Let's see. We've got 10 minutes. Let's go ahead and add a green floor and a blue sky. And these are things that took me years to figure out. So the fact that y'all are getting them super, super quick is great. So if you're ever in render view and you're struggling to get out, just hit escape. So now making sure that we are in object mode, not edit mode, because we don't want to add a floor to the ground to this. We want to add it to a different object, because Earth and the table are distinctly different. All right, so let's go ahead and add a plane, and we can take this plane and let's just scale it up like 20, something nicely huge. Whose work are you criticizing? Stormstrike? So from here, just like last time, we can actually add a new material. And with this material, we can take this. I'm going to just rename it just for the heck of it. Green. So we're going to make this green. Make a nice happy green. Something not too bad. Yeah, well, it takes time and effort. Distinctly effort. If you have nothing on your screen, that's not my fault. So let's take this, render it. Oh, that's starting to look much better. Don't have to worry about it too much. And from here, if we go back to the world view, let's take this. So this is just a flat color at the moment. These are the 3 different colors. If you mess around with these settings, you can see it gets a little bit more exciting with some of the stuff happening. Let's just take this and turn the white up and get some kind of happy blue. Happy little blue sky. All right, so if we take that, it's not going to actually change it in your Blender editor here, but if you hit F12, you'll actually see that it does change the render. So pretty much the sky is anything that the camera can't see. So if it can't see something, it fills it out with the sky, just like a skybox in a video game. That's the same premise here. Yeah, it is some nicely polished grass. So
we'll get into more details in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
And this is a beautiful tutorial on, just getting you introduced to Blender 3D as it is. And I guess I'll go ahead and you can leave that beautiful picture of that happy table with the happy sky and the polished grass. And I will show my ugly mug. Here we go. Hi, guys. I'm back. So thank you once again, Zach. This has been an awesome tutorial. And, he has said, maybe future. No, we are definitely planning on doing more of these streams.
Woohoo!
In fact, we're talking to Zach about possibly doing this maybe next week, depending on scheduling with you, Zach. So, and other events that we do have going on with the GGDA. MomoCon is next week too, so we got all that. We're not sure, but be sure to like, subscribe, and follow all of our channels and videos, please. It really helps us out a lot. and stay tuned for all the exciting stuff we got coming up. Like I said, we may be having some video from MomoCon coming up very soon. That's still to be determined. But in the meantime, that's me. I got to run my mouth. Thank you to our Patreons, the Georgia Game Developers Association. We are a nonprofit organization. All of us, including Zach, are doing this voluntarily. That's right. So thank you, Stephen Kofi, Burton Posley, Lee Freeman, James Simpson, Trey Carpenter, Joe Casaval. You guys are our heroes. And if you want to join that hero list, all you got to do is go to patreon.com/Georgia Game Devs. And so your support will help us to improve game developers and their community and help bring better games to life, or maybe even improve your artistic skills, right? All right. Like adding supports to picnic tables.
Yep.
All right. If you're interested in following us along, you want to get in touch with us on social media, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at ggda_org, or you can go to facebook.com/groups/ggda.org. And also, if you're in Atlanta on the first weekend of October, you got to come check out Siege. Southern Interactive Entertainment Gaming.
Southern Interactive Experience and Gaming Expo, I think.
No, it's not Experience.
Is it not? Okay, I apologize.
We'll get it one of these days. One of us will get it right? But if you're interested in game development, you come check out SiegeCon. It's awesome. If you're new to the industry, if you're experienced to the industry, you got to come check it out. All of us and several different gaming companies here in Georgia collaborate for this event. It's awesome. And if you're interested in speaking at SiegeCon, you can go to ggda.org and possibly, apply for speaking. We are looking for more speakers. I have been on panels. Zach, I think you've been on panels too, haven't you?
I have not, actually, not yet.
Oh, shame on it. We're going to do it this year then, I guess, probably. Anyways, we do it every year the first weekend of October. Moving forward, I mentioned MomoCon, which is next week, 2018, for all of you watching this video several years from now. MomoCon, the career fair, is at 10 a.m. May 24th at the Omni Hotel in downtown Atlanta. So immediately after that, join us for the Georgia Esports League Spring Championship. This is where it's a pretty cool fact. College students are playing video games and competing for more than $6,000 in college scholarships. Where do the times go? You play video games, you win money to go to college. All right. So, like I said, be sure to tune in on all of our channels: YouTube, Twitch, Mixer. Those are at /Georgia Game Devs. Like I said, hit that like and subscribe and follow buttons. We really appreciate your help and support. Again, thank you, Zach, and we be sure to follow our channels and stay up to date. Zach is going to continue these Blender workshops and get into some animations and a little bit more advanced features within Blender, because I'm blown away already. I was lost when he started.
We'll work on animation. That's not my forte. but we'll work on animations. I can show people the basics for sure. Yeah.
Well, I got lost at file start new. So that's just me. But anyways, thank you everybody for tuning in tonight. We really, really appreciate it. And I'm going to throw one more commercial in your face, and that will be right about now. Thank you again, everybody. Good night.
Good night.